A Boeing 737, drifting silently over the Aegean Sea, perfectly steady, its engines humming. But no one was flying it. For hours, air traffic controllers tried to make contact. Fighter jets scrambled. And when they finally caught up to the aircraft, what they saw would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Through the cockpit window, the captain sat motionless, slumped over the controls. Beside him, the first officer, frozen, his mask hanging loose. Inside the cabin, oxygen masks dangled from the ceiling. Rows of passengers sat eerily still, faces pale in the morning light. The plane was alive, but everyone inside was dead. This is the real story of Helios Airways Flight 522, a flight that took off like any other, but became one of the most chilling enigmas in aviation history. It was a clear, warm Sunday in Larnaca, Cyprus. August 14th, 2005. Helios Airways ground crews moved briskly in the Mediterranean heat. Passengers filed through security. A young couple returning from their honeymoon. A 6-year-old boy clutching a toy airplane. An elderly woman visiting her grandchildren. Ordinary people, living ordinary moments, boarding their short-haul flight to Prague with a stopover in Athens. On the tarmac stood a Boeing 737-300, registration 5B-DBY. Inside, 121 people prepared for departure. In the cockpit sat Captain Hans-Jürgen Merten, a 59-year-old German pilot with decades of experience, and First Officer Pampos Karalambos, 25, a capable Cypriot aviator. For both men, it was routine. At 9:07 a.m., Flight 522 lifted off and began climbing smoothly into a flawless blue sky. No one could have known. Within minutes, oxygen would begin to fade and consciousness would slip away. As the aircraft ascended past 12,000 feet, a sharp tone suddenly blared in the cockpit, a loud, repetitive warning horn. It was the cabin altitude warning, a critical signal that cabin pressure was dropping to dangerous levels. And that confusion was about to prove fatal. Inside the cockpit, the crew began troubleshooting what they believed was an air conditioning malfunction. The captain asked his first officer to check the cooling circuits, but the real problem was invisible. The pressurization mode selector had been left in manual during maintenance checks the night before. It had never been switched back to auto. Without automatic pressurization, the cabin was losing air, slowly, silently, steadily. The higher they climbed, the thinner the air became. First came lightheadedness, then confusion, then a creeping fog across the mind. Within minutes, both pilots were experiencing hypoxia, oxygen deprivation. Their vision narrowed, their thoughts scattered, their coordination weakened. They were now too impaired to recognize what was happening. At 9:18 a.m., the captain's voice crackled over the radio to maintenance control in Larnaca. "Where are the cooling circuit breakers?" The engineer, puzzled, responded. "Can you confirm your pressurization mode is set to auto?" Silence. The line went dead. That was the last voice anyone ever heard from Flight 522. By 9:20 a.m., air traffic controllers in Athens noticed something unsettling. The aircraft wasn't responding to any calls, yet it flew flawlessly, holding course toward Athens at 34,000 feet. Inside the cabin, passengers had also begun to lose consciousness. Flight attendants, struggling to stay upright, attempted to assist, but one by one, they too collapsed. Oxygen masks deployed automatically, swinging from the ceiling. But these masks, designed only for emergency descents, provided just 12 to 15 minutes of oxygen. For most, it was already too late. The aircraft was now fully under autopilot control, a machine carrying 121 unconscious souls through the bright August sky. It was no longer a flight. It was a ghost in motion. At 10:30 a.m., after an hour of failed contact attempts, the Hellenic Air Force scrambled 2 F-16 fighter jets from Tanagra Air Base. Their mission: intercept and assess the unresponsive Boeing. As the jets closed in, The airliner appeared perfectly normal, engines running smoothly, wings level. But as they pulled alongside and looked through the windows, what they saw sent chills through their veins. The captain sat slumped over the controls, completely motionless. The co-pilot was frozen beside him. No movement, no sign of life. Through the cabin windows, the fighter pilots could see oxygen masks hanging in long rows. Passengers seated upright, still as if asleep. Flight attendants collapsed in the aisles. One F-16 pilot radioed back, his voice tight. The pilot is not in control, no signs of consciousness. For nearly an hour, the fighters escorted the ghost plane, unable to intervene, only to witness. They could do nothing but watch as the Boeing continued its lonely path across Greek airspace. Then, at 11:49 a.m., something stirred. A figure appeared in the cockpit. He was wearing a uniform, but not a pilot's. It was flight attendant Andreas Prodromou, a 25-year-old with flight training and a commercial pilot's license. Somehow, Andreas had survived longer. He'd had access to portable oxygen bottles stored in the cabin, bottles that, unlike passenger masks, could provide oxygen for extended periods. Those bottles had bought him precious extra time. He had regained consciousness, alone, to find everyone else gone. Desperate but determined, he made his way to the cockpit, moved the captain's body aside, strapped himself in, and tried to regain control. The F-16 pilots saw him wave through the window. His gestures were frantic. He was fighting to save the aircraft, fighting against time and fading oxygen. Inside, he pulled at controls, checked switches, tried to restart communications. But the fuel gauges told a devastating story. The tanks were nearly empty. At 11:54 a.m., the left engine flamed out. Minutes later, the right engine sputtered and died. The silence must have been deafening. Andreas tried desperately, restarting systems, searching for power, but nothing came back. With both engines gone, the Boeing 737 became a glider, descending slowly toward the rugged hills north of Athens. At 12:03 p.m., the aircraft dipped its nose slightly. The F-16 pilots called out over the radio. No response. At 12:04 p.m., Helios Airways Flight 522 slammed into a hillside near the village of Grammatique. A massive fireball erupted on impact. All 121 people on board were killed instantly. When rescuers arrived, the scene was devastating. Twisted metal, burnt luggage, scattered among the wreckage were haunting reminders. Oxygen masks, children's toys, personal belongings. As investigators combed through the site, they found something unsettling. The aircraft had been fully operational until impact. There had been no fire before the crash, no structural failure, no explosion. Something far stranger had taken place, a slow, invisible suffocation. Within days, investigators from Greece, Cyprus, Germany, and Boeing began piecing together the mystery. The black boxes were recovered. When they played back the cockpit voice recorder, the early moments told the full story. The alarm, the confusion, the radio call, and then silence. In the background, only the constant hiss of thinning air. It became clear. The crew never realized the pressurization system was in manual mode. The aircraft climbed normally, but cabin pressure remained near ground level. As they ascended, the air inside grew thinner. Within 12 minutes of takeoff, both pilots were incapacitated. The passengers and crew followed soon after. The plane then continued on autopilot for over 2.5 hours before running out of fuel. The final report was devastating. The cause? Human error, compounded by procedural oversight and a critical design flaw. Maintenance crews had left the system in manual mode. Flight crews failed to catch the error during pre-flight checks. And the alarm system, using identical sounds for different warnings, sealed their fate. In the aftermath, Boeing redesigned the cabin altitude warning horn, ensuring it could never be mistaken for another alarm. Checklists were revised. Training protocols were updated worldwide. Helios Airways, the small Cypriot carrier, never recovered. The airline ceased operations within a year. But beyond the technical lessons, there was something deeper that stayed with everyone who studied this case. For over 2 hours, this jetliner had flown alone across the sky, controlled by no one conscious. Inside, time had stopped. The hum of the engines was the only sound left, a mechanical heartbeat carrying a lifeless body through the heavens. Pilots who flew that route in the years that followed often said they still thought about it. The ghost plane that flew itself, steady and silent, until the very end. In aviation, catastrophic errors are rarely spectacular. They're quiet, almost invisible. A forgotten switch, a misunderstood sound, a single missed detail that grows, breath by breath, until it's too late. Helios Airways Flight 522 was one of those moments where procedure met tragedy, where technology outlived its operators, where a perfect machine continued flawlessly even as everything human inside, and when it finally fell, it left behind a question that still echoes. How could something so routine become so terrifyingly empty? Even now, nearly 2 decades later, the story endures, a haunting symbol of fragility in the skies, a reminder that flight exists within margins thinner than we believe. Because every flight begins the same way, with confidence, with trust, with routine. But sometimes, all it takes is one switch left in the wrong position, one alarm misunderstood, one moment where human attention falters, and the sky remembers. Because in aviation, complacency is written in the language of tragedy, not in explosions or mechanical failure, but in silence, in the hiss of thinning air, in the unheard warning that came too late. Helios 522 didn't crash because of catastrophic failure. It fell because of a switch, a sound, and a second chance that never came. The ghost plane is gone, but its lesson remains, etched into every checklist, every alarm redesign, every pilot who now knows. The smallest oversight can silence an entire sky.